All right, our next speaker, feeding cereals with high DON levels. Final speaker of the morning, it's Dr. Art Strathma. Art is a cash crop farmer, author and speaker who oversaw research, teaching, extension, and business development at Ridgetown campus at the University of Guelph for over 30 years. His research program has focused on pest management strategies for corn, soybeans, and wheat. The main types of his research include risk management for seed treatment used on corn and soybeans, farm to fork management for mycotoxins in wheat and corn, and management of invasive and key pests in corn, soybeans, wheat, and insect-resistant management for transgenic corn. He's an international leader in developing application techniques to optimize the effectiveness of fungicides for Fusarium head blight in corn and wheat, and was involved in the development of the DONcast, a model for dioxazole in wheat. Should be a very interesting presentation. Welcome, Art.
Thank you very much for the welcome and the introduction and the invitation. The Maritimes now have a special place in my heart because my daughter moved out here with her husband to near Moncton to dairy farm. So one of my kids is a farmer, which is really cool, and she's here with me today. So. I hear you had a bit of a problem with DON this year. And we've had those problems over the years as well. And we really haven't gotten all the way there in corn. Corn is a real challenge. But we have made some progress in wheat. And so we've had conditions for a really bad year weather-wise, but we've not had a really significant problem, at least not one we couldn't handle. But every once in a while, you just get overwhelmed, and I think that's what happened with you folks this year. Sometimes it's just so bad that anything you would have tried wouldn't have helped. So here you have a bunch of grain. And I have a question for you. How much of it is wheat that was a problem? Is it, were all the cereals affected?
More of a spring wheat problem.
More of a spring wheat problem? What about the other cereals, barley, oats?
They were all touched.
They were all touched, eh? So I don't have a lot of experience on the other small grains, but I do have a fair bit of experience. Well, the other thing I wanted to add is I'm retired now, so every day is a Saturday. So I want to explain to you a couple things about DON that you really need to know about. It's somewhat new, and it's not always just DON that you need to focus on. So we'll go through that. And I'm going to remind you about the guidelines that the government has. They're there for a reason, because if you exceed them, on feeding livestock, you will have problems. And some things we learned about storage, because you're still into that, and this is a bad month right now you got to pay attention to. Sampling is something we've done some work on, and so I'll tell you about some things we've learned there. And testing is another one. And we're at the point now where you can start doing your own testing if you are really serious about it. All the livestock feed suppliers, they will be testing because they want to make sure that you're not, or they're not at risk. We've also done some work over the years on cleaning the grain. And then I don't have a lot of experience with binders, but I know enough that I can kind of steer you in the right direction, but also to explain why there are some problems in North America accessing them. Okay, and it has to do with regulations. And then we'll finish off with some feeding information. So what is DON? Well, it's short for deoxynivalenol. Nobody wants to remember that word. And but a lot of folks call it vomitoxin. And so one of the main things that it does, especially in monogastric organisms like pigs and us, it will cause vomiting. And a lot of my friends just shorten it up and call it vom. It kind of bothers me that they call it vomitoxin, because we don't need to be telling the news about something that causes things to throw up. And so Dawn is probably a little less of a noxious term. And it's produced by a fusarium fungus. It's a really long name, so I won't bother you with that. But you got to understand that Dawn does do a number of nasty things. It used to be just considered something that caused feed refusal, but it does affect the intestine. It affects gene expression. It does something to the brain. It affects cells and organelles in the cells, like mitochondria, affects the energy process. It affects immune systems, not only in livestock, but also in people. It affects reproduction. And so there's a lot of things that we worry about. And you don't need to worry so much about Dawn in your food, because it's heavily regulated. And so there's a lot of testing and a lot of concern about it. So the food companies are well aware, and so we don't worry about that. But in other countries where they don't have those strict guidelines and so on, they do have issues. So I was in Uruguay working with the FAO a number of years ago, and I took home some bread and I tested it, and it's bread that I had to eat, and it tested well above the guidelines that we would feed it to pigs with. So yeah, it was a bit of an issue. So we trained them to get to where we are. So now in Uruguay, they're not eating that nasty stuff. Now, I want to get you to understand a little bit about what happens in the plant. Now, this could be wheat. I forgot to change the pictures. It's corn. And a couple of things here. You see 3-acetyl-Dawn, 3A-Dawn, and there's 15A-Dawn. And those are what the fungus produces as a precursor to making Dawn. So before you get those, and so some isolates of fusarium produce 15A-Dawn, and some produce 3A-Dawn. We have mostly 15A-Dawn. You folks, we know, have mostly 3A-Dawn. Okay, so we hardly worry about it, the 3A-Dawn, whereas you would worry more, or worry mostly about 3A-Dawn. Now, one thing we've learned not that long ago is that the plant then reacts to the Dawn, because Dawn is a pathogenic factor. It helps the fungus cause disease. And the plant has learned to break that down and makes Dawn glucoside. It adds a sugar molecule to the Dawn. And that makes it about 10 times less toxic, and the plant can carry on. So a lot of the breeding that has gone on in mostly wheat and other cereals, we've done a lot better job in getting more tolerant wheat varieties than we have in corn. And so we have this Dawn glucoside, and if it's the 3-acetyl-Dawn, the precursor also can be made a little safer by the plant, turning it into a glucoside. Now, Dawn and 3A-Dawn have the same toxicity, all right? And the Dawn glucoside, as well as the 3A-Dawn glucoside, are about 10 times less toxic. But the rotten thing that happens is when a pig eats it in the stomach, it converts the glucoside back to the parent material. So the glucoside becomes Dawn and 3A-Dawn and is toxic to the pig. So really it doesn't matter in your feed whether you've got Dawn or 3A-Dawn or if you have the glucoside or not. They all end up causing the same problem. So one thing we've learned is that we got to pay attention to what else is there, okay? And in your feed sample, because now I don't know, I don't think you have a lot of pork production in the Maritimes as much as we might have. Mostly it's dairy. So the other thing that we've learned is 10 years ago or more, we didn't worry much about mycotoxins in dairy. Now they pay a lot of attention to it because they've learned that, especially in lactating cattle, there are some serious effects. So much so that the same guidelines exist for dairy as they do for pigs, finishing hogs. So, yeah. So I just want to show you how this plays out a little bit. So we had a real nasty year in 2018 in corn. Like, it was the worst ever. And we had levels of DON in corn over 30 parts per million and up to 50 parts per million. And the most we had ever seen before that is around 10 parts per million. So it was bad. So we took a bunch of samples off of trucks and we looked at what was in there. So remember, we worry more about 15A DON, so our 15A DON numbers are higher. So there was DON, and you see there's, a bunch of the total DON is also DON 3G, and then the glucoside, the DON 3, the DON glucoside, the breakdown product that the plant makes, was 17% of the total DON, and the 15A DON, the precursor, was only 7%. All right, so basically, DON is still the main player, but the DON 3G, the glucoside, the safer product or safer metabolite, is still a significant component. And then we also have some other compounds. And so how much lodging would you have had this year in grains? So if the grain lodges and gets into contact with the soil, then you'll have a lot of T2 in there as well. And you don't want to mess with T2 because it's 10 times more toxic than DON. And so you have a small amount of T2 in your analysis, you'll have some problems. And we don't get zearalenone, okay, which is ZON in this picture. We get a little bit of it because it's at the wrong time of year. If we have corn and wheat, it's all winter wheat where I am, and it never gets cool enough. But I'm wondering if it was relatively cool here after flowering. So the cooler the temperature and the wetter the temperature, the wetter the environment, the more zearalenone you get. And it comes from the same fungus. So what happens is the fungus will switch from producing DON to zearalenone. So I don't know, I haven't seen any data from this part of the world. I don't know how much of it, but you don't want to neglect that because zearalenone affects reproduction a lot. It is an estrogen mimic, so it's just like adding some estrogen to your feed, and especially if you're looking at reproductive animals, it really messes with that. You won't get FB as fumonisin. We get that when it's hot and dry. You won't get that here. I'd be really surprised. But the ones you got to pay attention to are this bunch, the first bunch of the DON compounds, T2 toxin at the end, and zearalenone. Even I have trouble with those nasty things. So that's what I just said here. So you got to pay attention to the other things because they certainly affect what happens in your diet for livestock. And so over the years, we've only paid attention to DON. And what I'm trying to get people to realize is that there's more to it than just DON itself. So we have these guidelines. So if you are raising cattle for meat, and you've got poultry, and you've got dry cows and so on. The finished food guideline is 5 parts per million. And for swine, young calves, and lactating dairy, we're at 1 part per million. And that's the finished feed. So one of the things you can think about then is, well, blending is your friend, all right? And so you can blend the actual ingredient, so you can blend off wheat. And our farmers do that all the time. In fact, my friend who helps me farm my farm, he likes to deliver the worst corn on the bottom of the truck and the less worst corn on the top of the truck. And then hopefully when they put the probe down, it kind of balances out. Like, go figure, right? Farmers are honest. Anyway, so it goes. But stuff happens the other way around too. So yeah, so it evens out. The thing about storage, you got to keep that grain below 14.5 or so %. And you also got to keep it below 2 to 5 degrees C, always below 10, otherwise the fungus starts to grow again. And aerate when the outside temperature is less than 70. So this time of year you got to pay attention to that because we've had these really warm days, and you want to keep that grain cool, and the temperature has gone up in the grain as well, and so you want to get it back down to cool. So nighttime ventilation and when the temperatures are cool. And another little thing that we've learned is snow and precipitation around the top of the bin through the vent holes and stuff and the eaves, and that can also create problems. So watch out for those. And occasionally, if you don't have ventilated bins, you might have to turn, run half of your grain through some system so it can get cool and put it back in. Sampling is another thing that's really important. Not all kernels in your sample have the same amount of mycotoxin in it. Some will have a huge amount, like hundreds of parts per million, and some will have nothing. And if you happen to choose in your sampling those that have high, your result's going to be high. So to get the best representative result is you have to take as much grain from as many places as is practical, okay? So if you just take a scoop off the top of the bin or a scoop off the top of the wagon, sorry, that's not going to cut it, all right? And so more is better. Mixing is really a good idea. And then subsampling systematically from that sample that you got, and then grinding as much as possible. Because what you want to do is you want to grind up the heavily contaminated kernels along with the less contaminated kernels so you get a uniform sample rather than a heterogeneous sample, and then you can trust your result more. And we found that's really important for corn just recently. We had lots of situations where farmers would take their load of corn to the elevator, they get tested, and they'd have a result over what they would take. So then they go to Timmy's with the truck and park outside and come around again and get tested again, and they get a different result. And it was hugely different. In fact, the same friend has had several loads rejected this year, and he's gone around and he's never been rejected the second time. Go figure. But anyway, that's how it goes. We test a lot now, and so that unit on the bottom right there, that reading unit, is about $2,500, okay? And a test kit, like one strip, is about $10, okay? And you can do this yourself if you want to. So you can go online to a company like Neogen, and you can figure that out. They'll tell you how to do it, and it's worth doing. All right, and so it is quantitative, so the latest strips can measure from 0 to 30 parts per million Dawn. The problem is you're not exactly sure what all you're measuring, because some of these Dawn-related compounds I showed you earlier will react with this test, and some don't. Okay, and so you need to know which ones are doing what. Now, these tests work a lot like a pregnancy test. So you grind the sample, you extract the sample with water, you have to measure what you do, and then you dip you pour a little bit in a little thingy, and you dip the stick in it, and then the stick will turn a color, and the intensity of the color is proportional to how much toxin there is. Very simple. So we looked at this after 2018, and these are a bunch of tests that we did. LCMS is the gold standard. That machine costs $750,000, so you're not going to get that on the farm. ELISA is the older way of doing things. It's a little more sophisticated, a little more involved. And then these other ones are the lateral flow kits, the Reveal Q, QuickTox, and Ritaquick. Those are the main ones that they were using in Ontario in the year we had that big mess. And what we did is we tested them all compared to pure compounds, all right? And we were interested to see if there was some cross-reactivity. So if you go down, how do you point here? This is right here. Yeah, you go down here. So this is Dawn plus 15A Dawn that we put in the sample, precise amounts. And you'll see that this comes out to 2, right, which is very close, which it should be. The ELISA was near 2, so it was measuring both Dawn and 15A Dawn. But this kit only measured Dawn. This one only measured Dawn. And this one only measured Dawn. You guys are in a lot better position. Here, the Reveal Q is also sensitive to 3A Dawn, so you'll pick up both. This one is, it has a matrix effect, so the corn is doing something to it, and then also here. But the test kits out in the east here are going to be a little more favorable, okay, than they are for us in the east, because we have 15A Dawn, you have 3A Dawn. Or sorry, in the west. Here we have Dawn, which is with the breakdown product, Dawn and Dawn 3 glucoside. So you're near 2 there. This one's not picking up glucoside. This is not picking up glucoside. This one is, and this one's not. All right, and so depending on what you're doing, you need to be aware of what test kit you're using and what result you get, so that you can make sure that the pig or the cow is faced with the right amount, okay? So if the guidelines say 1 part per million is your limit, and you're testing with this test kit, and this one, you can say that you're more realistic to what the animal's facing. Anyway. Cleaning grain can help, and what you're trying to do is get the less dense grain, which are the most highly contaminated kernels. You want to get them out. And so this is some stuff we did with corn, but you can expect the same kind of thing with wheat. And so as you the lighter kernels here show more Dawn, and the heavier kernels show a lot less. And what you have is the percent of the mass. So what you have to take out a fair bit, actually, to get, in some cases, 20% of this sample had to be taken out to get it to where you want to be. So you have to make that trade-off. And the thing you have to worry about a bit too is what do you do with what you clean out? Most often it has to get dumped because it's not good for much else. And another thing that I learned over the years is where the dawn is. Usually it's on the outside of the kernel, and so you can do a little bit of pearling or some other thing to improve the quality. And this binder thing is a bit of a tough subject to talk about. So the rules in the US and Canada, especially in Canada, are not friendly. So CFIA is the governing body, and in order to make a claim that you are in fact helping with a mycotoxin, you got to do a lot of expensive studies. And the market in Canada is not very big relative to other places. So a lot of these companies are less willing to do that. So the get around is they will call it a anti-caking agent or something like that. And the rules are a lot less strict. And I'm talking for real here. This is what's happening. And so some of the best things that are on the market in the world are not as available here in Canada, unfortunately. Okay, some of the better products like MycoFix from Biomin and MycoZorb from Alltech. Now, you might be able to get them kind of a roundabout way. So, but anyway, I'm not supposed to promote them, but I just want to say that this is happening in the EU. And these things actually help to adsorb or bind, but they also help to break down toxins, and so they perform a little better. Kelmanax and Big Max both are made by Arm & Hammer, and Calcil is made by Chemin, and those are binding products. And what they are is basically a special clay that adsorbs mycotoxins. Now, not all of them. And so one of the mycotoxins that's not absorbed that well because of its chemical properties is DON. A world-famous mycotoxin called aflatoxin, which you do not get, all right, that one gets absorbed. So you got to be careful with them. So you have to understand your risk. For you folks, the high risk is DON in pigs. I'd say you have a high risk in dairy cattle relative to others. And zearalenone in pigs especially, and in dairy, you have also the zearalenone. Oops, I'm trying to push the wrong button here. So when you feed, you have to test all your ingredients, and you have to make sure that they get below. You really got to pay attention to that 1 part per million, and you got to pay attention to the fact that it has to include the other pieces that could also be toxic. You want to test all your ingredients separately, blend, and then you want to test the finished feed just to be sure. And with swine, it's easier. I don't know how well it works with dairy cattle, but the swine producers always test a small batch of feed on their pigs to make sure that their pigs are not telling lies. And also be careful, do not rely on the feed additives to bring a mess down, because you will not be able to do that. It's there when you're on the margin to help you out. It's not going to solve a big problem. So we learned a little bit what DON is, and it's not just one thing. We know that the guidelines are there to make sure that you do well with your investment in your cattle and feeding them. Storage is something you got to pay attention to. Sampling, you need a representative sample. You want to be, you can test now on your own, but you have to be aware of what it's telling you. Cleaning is helpful. Binders are helpful, but you got to be careful. And I'm sorry, a lot of the grain that you have right now, if it's 5, 10 parts per million and you're trying to feed it to dairy cattle, I don't have an answer for you. So I'll leave you with a bad note there. And so do we have any questions? We have 1 minute for questions.
I have a question, sir. A very interesting topic. As far as human health, when we are, nearly everyone here is moving grain, unloading and loading, augering or whatever, what is the risk to human health? Do we need like a COVID mask, or do we need a respirator mask, or what's the risk to human health?
That's a really good question, and it's something that bothers me and we don't pay a lot of attention to. So farmer exposure is significant. The fortunate thing is the older you are, the less impact it has on you. All right, and so if you, you and I are safe, right? No, but the health effects are mainly with children, right, and people that are growing up and developing, and so it is an issue. It's not any worse, I don't think, than farmer's lung that you got to watch out. The grain dust in general is not good for you. It really is not good for you. So you should protect yourself.
Any other questions? Ian Shaw?
Yes, I was just wondering about seed for this year. Like most of the seed available on the island has levels of Don or toxin in it. Will that transfer onto next year's crop?
No, next year's a new, unless you hold over the grain and try to blend it off, which does happen. Okay, so I know a man who made piles of money by buying as much contaminated grain, and he knew the regulations, so they wouldn't be looking for it as hard, and he blended it off, bought corn from down south and blended it off, and he did well. But as far as the disease is concerned, every year's a new year because it's all environment.
Okay, so wheat seed planted with 5% toxin should be all right.
No, I would treat it.
Oh,
Make
yes.
sure it's treated.
Yes.
Very good question. That was on everybody's mind. Thanks, Ian. Any other questions?
And clean it too. Make sure you, before you plant it, clean it and treat it, and you'll be fine.
One question I do have, there's lots of talk about, if you test the truckload and it comes back high on toxins, get rejected, go to Tim Hortons, come back, test it again, you get it low.
Not always.
Not always, not always. We've done quite a bit of testing ourselves and playing around with how to fairly, both for the farmer selling and the farmer purchasing, how do you say what's in that truck? Yeah. So if you're going for pigs trying to be under 1 ppm on a finished feed product, and you're taking a toxin sample at say 6 ppm, a toxin sample at 1.3. I've seen that on the same truck a few times.
Okay, it's all about sampling.
Yeah.
Okay, and so if you are really worried about it, the safest thing you can do is a tailgate sample. It's a lot of work,
Yeah.
but then you get the best result.
Yeah.
Then you know what you have, and you want to grind before you sample or test. You want to grind as much of that as you can, practically.
Yeah.
And then you'll know what you have. But taking little bits, it's tough.
Yeah. But even like in the same trucks before, we actually were trying with a neighbor, and we did 8 probes in the truck.
Yeah.
Ground down, like, I think we were close to 4 kgs out of 8 probes.
Yeah.
And then did 8 probes again in the same truck and ground down off of that. And the toxins on that were close to 3 ppm in the difference.
Yeah.
And that's your turning point between, do you take the truck, do you not?
Yeah.
So where do you set your level on something like that? If you're having what I'd consider a fairly good sample from the truck, both from the same truck within the same hour, and you're getting a higher level and a lower level, and you're on that rocking point of, is it above that 2 ppm or below that 2 ppm?
So the ethanol plant, for example, plays the odds. So they set a level because they know that it's up and down. They know the games everyone's playing, and so they just kind of figure out the odds, and they set a level. Because it's really hard for me to say that if they measure a 5, is it really a 5? Even on the testing itself, the test kit, is it a 5 or is it a 4 or is it a 6? You know, you can't, in court, it would not stand. But the cutoff is 5, right? Whether you can argue it or not. And so 5.01 is out and 4.99 is in, right? And so they do set that. If you're a pork producer and you want to bring something in, then you got to be a lot more serious about how you sample. So the probe sample of 4 in a truck, which works for the ethanol plant, in my opinion, does not work for swine feed.
So, so if you're getting conflicting toxins, like, is there a way, like, do you take the average on it, assuming that you're pulling from different spots in the truck, or?
So are you talking from the swine producer's point of view?
Yes.
So you'll want to take a different kind of sample. I would not trust the probe samples on a truck as much as a tailgate sample.
Okay.
Okay? If you're worried about, you know, especially when it's bad like this year, you can't mess around. And so you need to spend the extra time getting a better sample.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Art.
Yep.
As you can tell, it's a very touchy subject around here.
Yeah. I figured as much, otherwise I wouldn't be here.
Affects everybody.
All right, thanks. Yep.
I guess the final thing on that is it's regarding to what kind of an animal you're feeding, you have to look at your own risk tolerance if you're buying product when you do your sampling and to protect yourself as much as possible.